But on to another big story. And 2 weeks of testimony in the Sean Combs federal sex crimes trial, wrapping up with dramatic allegations, including a break-in at rapper Kid Cudi's home, his car set on fire, and an ominous warning from Combs. Plus, more claims from former employees about the assaults and injuries ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura says she endured. Jurors now on the break for this long holiday weekend. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all federal charges, including racketeering and sex trafficking by force. So here now to break down this high-profile trial, criminal defense attorney Joshua Ritter, host of the Courtroom Confidential podcast. Joshua, great to see you. All right, so I want to talk about some of this testimony. Kid Cudi testified about his home being broken into, his car set on fire. We've also heard from a male escort who testified to creating, quote, sexy scenes with Cassie under the direction of Sean Combs, and then Diddy's former assistant who testified to seeing Combs assault another girlfriend. Which one of these three men do you think potentially had the most impact?
I actually think it's Kid Cudi, and that's because the things that he is testifying to brings us outside of the realm of domestic violence and these kind of sex crimes that we've been hearing a lot about. Remember, in a racketeering case, they have to show a criminal enterprise and these ongoing criminal predicate acts that we refer to them as. Something like arson, something like that car bombing that Kid Cudi testified to, the break-in, residential burglary, all of those things start to paint the picture that this is far more than just a incredibly jealous or abusive man, that this is someone who is willing to extend beyond that and commit crimes. And that, I think, is really moving the needle as far as the racketeering charges go.
All right, so Joshua, let's talk about both sides have brought up this victim 3, this also known as Gina, although she is now not expected to testify. First of all, what are your thoughts on how she fits into all of this, especially if the jury doesn't actually hear from her directly?
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult for the prosecution to actually establish the elements that they need for her charges if she does not testify. And I imagine if they are not able to either locate or get her to cooperate, they may not go into closing arguments with those charges still attached to the case. But if they are able to prove up those charges with her or without her, it goes further towards this idea of sex trafficking, this idea of sexual exploitation, and again, towards the racketeering. You know, all of this kind of fits into that overall scheme of a criminal enterprise. But I think when the government starts to extend beyond the freak-offs and beyond the abuse, they start to paint a fuller picture for the jury of just really how this person operated like a criminal.
So, yeah, Joshua, let's talk about that. I was just talking to somebody here at work yesterday saying that they don't feel like they're seeing that this is actually, you know, federal crimes have been committed. Do you feel like the prosecution up to this point is doing a good job of laying out the framework of Combs, you know, allegedly having this criminal enterprise to build this racketeering case against him?
I agree with your coworkers that you were speaking with. There was a problem. There was a lot of questions of, you know, we saw a lot of evidence of crimes, and those crimes were domestic violence type crimes and sexual assault type crimes. But where was this federal racketeering moving into this? It's a complicated law, and it does require certain acts to show that this was in furtherance of a overall criminal enterprise and other people working in concert with that. And it seemed like most of the witnesses were just testifying to this relationship and corroborating Cassie's claims of suffering at the hands of Diddy. But now, like I said, with Kid Cudi and some of these other witnesses, his assistant talking about an attempt to hunt down Suge Knight at one point armed with weapons, this starts to, like I said, now fill in those pieces and create this fuller kind of tapestry for the jury of understanding how this was a criminal enterprise. They were all serving the ongoing needs of Sean Combs, and that's why the racketeering charges might be more applicable from this time moving forward.
All right, so Joshua, there's been a lot of salacious testimony, a lot of shocking testimony, but it's been just that, basically, you know, setting the scene with words. Do you think the jury will be shown the actual video footage of any of these so-called freak-offs?
I think they might need to because of the point that you just made. It's one thing to hear from witnesses. It's another thing to have witnesses further corroborate those witnesses' claims, but it is something else entirely for them to actually see videotape. If they have videotape, not just capturing what looks like an elaborate party, or a party that none of us might quite be able to wrap our heads around, but actual assaults, people being forced to do things, that's going to be very impactful evidence. If the government actually has it, I would be surprised if they did not use it.
And last question for you. We've been looking at this from the prosecution side. Let's look at this from the defense side. Do you think the defense, at least to this point, is successfully countering these assertions from the prosecution?
I think you have to admit that they've made some headway along the way. I don't know if they've done enough to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors, but when they're asking questions, certainly with their cross-examination of Cassie that took place a few days ago, when they're showing text messages that show her anticipating, looking forward to, sometimes planning some of these freak-offs, then you start to create questions of how much was this done without the consent of the people involved. Yes, maybe inside of their head they didn't want to take part of it. Maybe it wasn't something that they enjoyed doing, but that's a very different thing from saying this was non-consensual, this was forced upon them by fear or other power tactics. And that's really what needs to be proven to the jury. And I think the defense has done a serviceable job up to this point of calling that into question.
And I want to ask you something, since you are a criminal defense attorney. Earlier this week, we saw that the defense opted not to cross-examine Cassie's mom, Regina. Do you think that was a good idea?
Strategically, I think it was smart. I mean, with the small points they may have been able to score with her, how would have that maybe perhaps backfired with the jury? A lot of this is about optics, right? You got to think, is the juice worth the squeeze? Am I going to come after this woman who's just talking about protecting her daughter for a couple of, minor points and inconsistencies I could point out, and will the jury hold that against me for actually coming after the mother? There's sometimes a strategy in just saying, thank you for being here, sorry for the trouble, but we have no questions for you.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. All right, criminal defense attorney Joshua Ritter, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.